Mom. What are you doing today?
Providence Place, owned by the Sisters of Providence, an ideal rental setting for retirees to continue their active, independent lifestyles. We have bright 1- and 2-bedroom apartments, a magnificent chapel with daily mass, restaurant-style dining, and wellness and entertainment programs. Call for a tour, 413-534-9700.
Mom, call me when you're not so busy.
Coming up on this edition of Reel to Reel. Springfield Bishop Mitchell Rosansky is named the 10th Archbishop of the Archdiocese of St. Louis, Missouri. A Chicopee parish shows their religious education students how much they are appreciated and missed. And Sister of St. Joseph, Melinda Pellerin, shares her thoughts on racial injustice and what the Catholic Church needs to do to bring about harmony. These stories are coming your way next on Reel to Reel. Hello and welcome to Reel on this historic week here, as our own Springfield Bishop Mitchell Rosansky will now be leading the Archdiocese of St. Louis, Missouri, following his appointment earlier this week to the post by Pope Francis. Bishop Rosansky was named as the 10th Archbishop of St. Louis after the Pope accepted the resignation of Archbishop Robert Carlson, who turned 75 last June 30th, and as required by church law, submitted his resignation. For Bishop Rosansky, who is 61, this appointment will move the Baltimore native from one of the smaller dioceses in the United States to one of the larger archdioceses, with more than 500,000 Catholics worshiping in 179 parishes. Carolee McGrath has more.
Springfield Bishop Mitchell Rosansky received a warm welcome as he processed into the Cathedral Basilica of St. Louis after being named the 10th Archbishop of St. Louis, Missouri. Archbishop Robert Carlson, who turned 75, submitted his resignation to Pope Francis as required by church law.
I want to share with you that you are receiving from the Holy Father a true man of God. Pope Francis is appointing someone who knows the joy of the gospel. He has a zeal for evangelization and is known throughout the Northeast, from Baltimore until Boston, for his work with peoples of all colors, all creeds.
Bishop Rosansky was installed as the 9th Bishop of Springfield in 2014. He left his hometown of Baltimore, where he was ordained a priest, in 1984. He served as the auxiliary bishop in the Archdiocese of Baltimore before coming to Springfield.
And I must admit that I was literally speechless when he told me of the Holy Father's appointment for St. Louis. I did feel a rush of emotions, especially one of sorrow, in knowing that I would have to leave Springfield. But 6 years ago, at the Holy Father's appointment, I left Baltimore, my hometown, to come here. This church quickly became my home, and I am deeply grateful to the people of the Diocese of Springfield for their commitment to living out the gospel and to working with me over these past 6 years.
In the Diocese of Springfield, Bishop Rosansky oversaw the merger of Cathedral High School and Holyoke Catholic, which is now Pope Francis Preparatory Academy. Through the years, he attended the March for Life with the youth of the diocese. Every Good Friday, he led a pro-life prayer vigil at Planned Parenthood. He was a speaker at the annual Faith on Fire prayer events, and he also focused on the Latino ministry.
I say it's surprising, but it really wasn't for those of us who worked with Bishop Mitch over these past almost 6 years. He has displayed an Episcopal style that is inclusive, pastoral, gospel-based, and certainly one that enriches the people of God here in Western Massachusetts. So it wasn't surprising, but it was, for many, especially his staff, a sad day, although we are very proud of him.
I think the most important thing that I've learned is that he just cares deeply about every single person in his care. And he described himself yesterday during his introduction in St. Louis as a parish priest, and he really is never happier than when he's in a parish and working with young people and old people and anybody. You know, he's really a very pastoral man.
These have no doubt been difficult times with both COVID-19 and the sadness and anger and racial tensions that followed the killing of George Floyd. But Bishop Rosansky has this message for the youth who might be discouraged. Last week, he and other religious leaders stood shoulder to shoulder at an interfaith prayer vigil for racial healing.
Jesus is present with that gospel message that never changes. And as Pope John Paul II did echo many times, whenever Jesus appeared to his disciples after his resurrection, the words, "Be not afraid." For young people, times are tough and times can be discouraging. But these times are transcended by the Lord Jesus, who helps us to see that the future can be better by what each one of us do.
The bishop will continue to oversee the affairs of the diocese until his installation at the end of August. Reporting for Reel to Reel, I'm Carolee McGrath.
And joining me now is Archbishop-elect Rosansky. Hello and congratulations on your appointment.
Thank you, Sharon, and it's good to be with you here today.
Well, I know I can speak for everyone here in the diocese that this news comes as both happy and sad, as we are so thrilled for you that you've been appointed an archbishop, which is a great honor, but also sad to see you leave us here in the Springfield Diocese where you have done so much good. What was your reaction to this appointment?
Literally, when Archbishop Christophe Pierre, our papal nuncio, called me and told me of the Holy Father's appointment as Archbishop of St. Louis, I was speechless. I couldn't even respond. I was so stunned by that news. So it took me a moment or two to gather myself together to tell Archbishop Pierre that I would accept the Holy Father's appointment and was grateful to him. But I knew immediately that that meant leaving home, leaving here, the Diocese of Springfield. So many mixed emotions with that one sentence that the papal nuncio had told me.
Now, you have been here for 6 years, and originally you're from Baltimore. I can imagine that this move will be a whole new beginning for you as well as you head out to the Midwest. What are your thoughts on making this move from the East Coast to a much larger archdiocese?
Well, when Archbishop Pierre told me that I would be moving to St. Louis, I knew that there would be a large learning curve. So I'm looking forward to learning about the Archdiocese of St. Louis, as I did when I came here to the Diocese of Springfield, in being able to get out amongst the parishes and the various institutions. It might take me a little longer there than it did here in Springfield, but I do hope to continue in that way of being out amongst the parishes, the people, the priests and the deacons and women and men religious of the Archdiocese of St. Louis.
And I think everyone will be wondering, not that we want to replace you by any means, but when can we expect to hear who will be appointed Bishop of Springfield?
Sharon, there's a process that we go through whenever there's a vacancy in a diocese. It's a process that if a bishop is approaching 75 and we know that his retirement is coming, we begin that process. Certainly for us with this surprise announcement, we will start from scratch. But the nuncio has asked me to write up a report to send to him what I feel that the issues are that the next Bishop of Springfield will face. He will also have different inquiries amongst other bishops, and then he will put together what is called a terna, T-E-R-N-A. And that terna will be sent to the Congregation of Bishops. They will make that choice, give their recommendation to the Holy Father, and then the Holy Father either approves or puts another name on that recommendation, and that news is given to the nuncio to alert the either priest or bishop that he has been assigned to a diocese.
All right, Archbishop-elect Mitchell Rosansky, thank you so much. And I know you will be here as Apostolic Administrator until August 25th when you're installed in St. Louis, so we won't say goodbye just yet.
That's right, Sharon, and it will be a privilege to continue to serve over these next 2 months.
Well, thanks again, Bishop. We as a world are in the midst of two viruses. One, the coronavirus pandemic, for which we are working so hard to contain its spread, ultimately seeking to eliminate it altogether. The second, the virus of racism, one that has permeated our culture here in the United States for 400 years. Pope Francis has called for Christians across the globe to be more deeply united as witnesses of mercy, asking the Spirit for the gift of unity. He last month said, "Only if we live as brothers and sisters can we spread the spirit of fraternity." Here in the Diocese of Springfield, a prayer service for racial unity was held Friday here in St. Michael's Cathedral, organized by Father Warren Savage, director and Catholic chaplain at the Interfaith Center at Westfield State University. Father Savage said the Spirit of God calls all to live in peace and unity with one another. And he said that the sin and evil of racism will never be eradicated until we examine the way we treat people. Earlier this week, I sat down with Sister of St. Joseph, Melinda Pellerin, pastoral minister at Holy Name Parish in Springfield. Sister Pellerin is a member of the board of directors of the National Black Sisters Conference and spends time speaking nationally on the need for dialogue and prayer to end racism. Pope Francis called on all of us globally to stand up to racial injustice. What does the church need to do to put an end to this?
Sharon, in part of that statement, he also said we can't turn a blind eye to racism, and I think globally we're bearing witness to a global community that is reacting to the death of an African American, and they're really making a stand for social justice. And I think that that's what we need to do. Unfortunately, I don't see that very much in the church in America among the bishops. Very few bishops have come out in talking about the death of George Floyd. Nationally, I see a resurgence of people that are protesting, but in this local community, Catholics, I don't see very many Catholics who are standing in outrage to what has happened. And I think following the Pope, we need to do more of that. Silence is not golden, it's deadly.
Mm-hmm. So what can we do?
Well, one of the things that we can do is in local churches and in our parishes, we can have prayer groups. Prayer is really important. The Pope talked about prayer. In fact, he mentioned that praying to Our Lady of Guadalupe, the Blessed Mother, Our Lady of Guadalupe, is the Blessed Mother of the Americas. That's one step. Another step I think that all the parishes should be doing is our priests are the leaders of the parishes. Why isn't it that on the pulpit priests are talking about this issue? I think programs like Just Faith are really good opportunities for people to learn about white privilege and how white privilege has caused many of the problems that we have in this nation. But I think you got to move from programs like Just Faith to protesting and to really doing what Jesus asks us to do. Jesus turned all the tables over in the temple, and that's a reaction, and it causes consequences. And Catholics have to know that if you take stands like this, you are in step with what Jesus teaches us, to love our neighbor, and when our neighbor is asking for our help, we must do that. We must help.
Mm-hmm. Commitment to the dear neighbor is the mission of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Springfield, a mission that Sister Melinda was drawn toward. She made her final vows, the first African American to join the Sisters of St. Joseph of Springfield, last October 13th during a liturgy at Holy Name Church in Springfield, the city of her birth. Now, tell me, you were born and raised in Springfield. Mm-hmm. What was that like for you as a young little black girl growing up in Springfield?
As an African American It was really difficult because the street we lived on, Sycamore Street, most of the children and most of the families went to Black Baptist churches, and here's this one Pellerin family who every Sunday trotted off to Holy Family Catholic Church. So among other African American children, oh, you're going to that white church. And so I grew up in that. I grew up in a black neighborhood, but I went to white Catholic church and school. So it was very different from where my classmates came from. And racism existed there. I can remember at age 6, a little boy in Sister Richard Agnes's class looked at me and said, "Why are you so dirty?" I was the only black student in the class, and I remember literally going down to the bathroom and using soap and trying to wipe this off. When I got home and I explained it to my parents, so that was one of the talks that we had about the differences between me and the other children in class. In my 6-year-old self, I wondered, why did this little boy think I was dirty? So those were some of my first experiences with the difference between who I was and the other students in the class.
And your parents grew up in Louisiana.
Yes.
And they wanted you to they didn't have children when they moved up here, from what you were telling me, but they didn't want their children to have to experience that. But what were some of the things that they experienced growing up in Louisiana, and why did they move?
They grew up in Broussard, Louisiana. In fact, my parents grew up a house away from each other. My father was the only boy, and he had 4 sisters. My mother was the youngest and the only girl, and she had 4 brothers. They grew up in this system of segregation, so they knew what it was like. We constantly, my family, my cousins, my sisters and brothers and I heard stories about going to the white Catholic church in Broussard, Louisiana. The white congregation would sit up front, black congregation sat in the back. White Catholics got their communion first. Black Catholics got it after all. The white Catholics got communion. The white priest would put gloves on and give them their communion, black Catholics. So my father always said, I don't want my children, if I marry this woman and we have children, I don't want them raised in the segregation of the South. And so my mother had been to Springfield a year prior to their marriage, and they decided to move to the state where the Kennedys had lived. My father always said that he wanted a chance for his children to have a better education.
This week, Friday, we're having a prayer service for unity. And what are your thoughts on that?
So I love the first song that we're doing for the prayer service, A Balm in Gilead. So the word balm is an ointment, and you spread an ointment to comfort. And so this song is actually a spiritual that black slaves sang on the plantation. So if you can imagine, these slaves' lives were horrific, but they still held on to hope, and that God would soothe all of their problems and all of the things that they were experiencing in slavery. So the song gives hope.
There is always hope, says Sister Melinda. During the Friday 5 p.m. prayer service for unity, participants prayed for racial harmony and the need to put a balm on the sin of racism that the United States has dealt with for 400 years. The planned prayer service is one of many events throughout the state and the nation that have followed the May 25th death of George Floyd, a black man killed by a Minneapolis police officer who knelt on Floyd's neck for nearly 9 minutes. Following Floyd's death, Apostolic Administrator Archbishop Mitchell Rosansky called for people of faith to pray for an end to this violence and the beginning of a meaningful effort to address the underlying currents of the racial divide.
But we cannot merely come here today and pray for that change and leave these four walls and go back to life as it is, accepting the status quo. We have to be converted, transformed.
The prayer service was organized by Father Warren Savage, Sister Melinda Pellerin, and Marion Johnson, Administrative Director of the Springfield Diocese Black Catholic Apostolate. Sister Melinda says, just like we are all dealing with COVID-19, so too is racism a virus.
So number one, it's a pandemic. It's just as bad and infectious as the pandemic we're talking about today. I often call it the pandemic of racism, that we have never found a cure for. We have never truly dealt with it. So number one, in order to get rid of a pandemic, you have to deal with it. You have to discuss those really difficult conversations about race and why that this has happened for 400 years. And then you have to act. You can't be about talk. You can't be about reading a good book on social injustice, racism. You've got to act. So you've got to be in the streets. You've got to peacefully demonstrate for the rights of African Americans in what's happening today. And when you act, know in the model of Jesus Christ that this is not going to be easy. Not any of it is easy. Martin Luther King, in his letter to Birmingham jail, said, racism is like a boil, and a boil is disgusting. It's got to be lanced. It's got to be taken care of. If you don't, the boil just gets bigger and bigger. And I think today we're seeing that happening. We've never dealt with it, and so we have to. And just like that, the COVID virus, we have to be dedicated to finding a cure for it.
Well, let's hope for that cure, that it comes very, very soon. And we thank you for talking to us, and we're praying for you.
Thank you.
And I would like to thank Sister Melinda Pellerin for her thoughtful insight and for sharing the stories of injustice her family has faced. Stories we hope will not be forgotten nor repeated. And still to come on Reel to Reel, Chicopee Parish shows their religious education students how much they are appreciated and missed. All still to come on this edition of Reel to Reel.
The Chalice of Salvation, your weekly spiritual connection. I'm your Chalice host, Passionist Brother Terrence Scanlon, inviting you to take time out of your busy day and join us Sunday morning. We welcome the newly named Archbishop Mitchell Rosansky and celebrate the most holy body and blood of Christ. The Chalice of Salvation, your spiritual connection, Sunday mornings at 10 on 22 News, WWLP, and coming up next on Fox 23, WXXA.
Hi, Mom. What are you doing today?
Providence Place, owned by the Sisters of Providence, an ideal rental setting for retirees to continue their active, independent lifestyles. We have bright 1- and 2-bedroom apartments, a magnificent chapel with daily mass, restaurant-style dining, and wellness and entertainment programs. Call for a tour, 413-534-9700.
Mom, call me when you're not so busy.
Back in mid-spring, Cindy Gagnon, Religious Education Director at St. Rose de Lima Parish in Chicopee, asked parishioners involved in the Faith Formation program to help out in showing their students that they still are thinking of them and are praying for them. The parish organized a car parade, driving past neighborhood homes of students in the Religious Education program. David Martin tells us more.
Teachers and volunteers from the Religious Education Program at St. Rose de Lima Parish in Chicopee were happy to be together again as they gathered at the parish's pastoral center to prepare for the parade of support for the children. Participants decorated their vehicles with balloons and signs to remind students how much they are missed by teachers and loved by God while staying at home during the COVID-19 pandemic.
I'm hoping that they understand that we're trying to bring them closer to their religious beliefs so that they can continue in the CCD program, and it will be fulfilling to them in their hearts, knowing that not only do their teacher educators really appreciate them and are showing their support for them, but also we're showing our support for them on the religious side.
Father William Torigny, the pastor of St. Rose de Lima Parish, offered a blessing before the religious education car parade.
Being vulnerable, we also realize how our lives are rooted in faith, and without faith, there's no way we could really endure these kinds of pandemics without having a greater reason and option.
The caravan began its journey, covering 9 boroughs of Chicopee in 2 days. 2 women volunteers put all the addresses of students by district into MapQuest, which created a route to follow. Donna Ruel, receptionist for the St. Rose de Lima Religious Education Program, achieved spiritual fulfillment by supporting religious education students, particularly since all of her grandchildren are currently enrolled in the program.
Them seeing us all come together, we're hoping that it will get them to understand that they have to continue in their faith. They have to continue with their prayers. They have to continue to believe. Go on the St. Rose website, attend Mass, be a participant of the whole religious ed.
Ruel has high praise for the religious education program at St. Rose de Lima Parish because of the involvement of Director Sidney Gagnon and Father Torigny. Father Torigny was proud to be participating in the parade, especially since July 1st will be his 15th anniversary as pastor of St. Rose de Lima.
There's a plus when you're in a parish for that length of time. You become the identifiable priest in their lives. And so it's going to be good for me to go out to the streets with the cars and the parade and wave and say hello, and just to be there and say we love you and we miss you. We need to appreciate today, and I think if anything, at least I can say in my life, I miss the presence of other people in my life. And we just want to be present to them today and present to them in the future.
Religious education teacher Sandy LePage was eager to see the faith formation students and hoped they would be just as excited to see their CCD teachers during the parade. LePage feels privileged to teach second grade religious education at St. Rose de Lima.
They'll be able to say, Mrs. LePage said this, and I can do this. Jesus is always with me no matter what I do. He's always there. I can turn to him. If they can remember that Jesus is always there for them, then maybe we've done a little bit of something good.
LePage is filled with joy to see the transition of faith her students experience from first day in the classroom until they make their first communion. Families chose many ways to show their appreciation to teachers en route during the parade, including holding signs of gratitude, saying how much the staff are missed. The final vehicle in the caravan tossed out treats to the children. Father Torigny is hopeful that the religious education program will be able to resume within the brick and mortar walls of a school this fall at St. Rose de Lima Parish in Chicopee. For Real to Real, I'm David Martin.
And for this week, that's Real to Real. As always, to keep up with all of the latest news on the Catholic Church, both here in the Diocese of Springfield and around the world, check out our news and information site, iobserve.org. Also, you can like us on Facebook at Catholic Communications. And a reminder, Chalice of Salvation, Real to Real, and so many important ministries and services in the Diocese of Springfield receive support from the annual Catholic Appeal. The appeal is still underway and would appreciate your help. To make a secure donation today, please head over to diospringfield.org and click on the ACA logo. Please remember those in need by supporting the annual Catholic Appeal. And I will see you right back here next week for a special Father's Day edition of Real to Real, your window on the world around you. See you then.
Real to Real is a production of the Catholic Communications Corporation, funded in part by the annual Catholic Appeal, and the support of you, our faithful viewers.